Hello. Okay, guys, so we are doing Nehemiah chapter 13, which is the last chapter of Nehemiah. And then we are starting in Esther's chapter 1 through 4. Esther's chapter 1 through 4. And then tomorrow we'll end in 9, and we'll still have one more Esther chapter. And then next week is Job. Job is pretty much the next 2 weeks. But we are almost done with week 18. All right, so let me go ahead and get started on the reading. All right, chapter 13. On that day, they read from the book of Moses in the hearing of the people, and in it was found written that no Ammonite or Moabite should ever come into the assembly of God, because they had not met the children of Israel with bread and water, but hired Balaam against them to curse them. However, our God turned the curse into a blessing. So it was when they had heard the law that they separated all the mixed multitude from Israel. So basically, they separated the Ammonites and the Moabites. And remember, Ruth was a Moabite. So interesting, right? Verse 4. Now before this, Eliashib, the priest, having authority over the storerooms of the house of God, was allied with Tobiah. And he had prepared for him a large room where previously they had stored the grain offerings, the frankincense, the articles, the tithes of grain, the new wine and oil, which were commanded to be given to the Levites and singers and gatekeepers, and the offerings for the priests. But during all of this, I was not in Jerusalem, for in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, I had returned to the king. Then after certain days, I obtained leave from the king. And I came to Jerusalem and discovered the evil that Eliashib had done for Tobiah in preparing a room for him in the courts of the house of God. And it grieved me bitterly. Therefore I threw all the household goods of Tobiah out of the room. Then I commanded them to cleanse the rooms, and I brought back into them the articles of the house of God with the grain offering and the frankincense. I also realized that the portions for the Levites had not been given them. For each of the Levites and the singers who did the work had gone back to his field. Notice here how he threw out all the things. He cleansed the rooms. That's kind of representative of what we do whenever we get saved. We realize that we've got bongs in our house, we've got alcohol in our house, we've got shot glasses in our house, and we get rid of all those things, right? It's kind of the same. Sorry, I just had to pause there because that's what it just reflected that to me. Verse 11. So I contended with the rulers and said, why is the house of God forsaken? And I gathered them together and set them in their place. Then all of Judah brought the tithe of the grain and the new wine and the oil into the storehouse. And I appointed as treasurers over the storehouse Shelemiah, the priest, and Zadok the scribe. And of the Levites, Pedaiah, and next to them was Hanan, the son of Zakur, the son of Mattaniah, for they were considered faithful, and their task was to distribute to their brethren. Remember me, O my God, concerning this, and do not wipe out my good deeds that I have done for the house of my God and for its services. In those days I saw people in Judah treading wine presses on the Sabbath, and bringing in sheaves and loading donkeys with wine, grapes, figs, and all kinds of burdens, which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I warned them about the day on which they were selling provisions. Men of Tyre dwelt there also, who brought in fish and all kinds of goods and sold them on the Sabbath to the children of Judah in Jerusalem. Then I contended with the nobles of Judah and said to them, what evil thing is this that you do, by which you profane the Sabbath day? Do not your fathers do thus? And did not our God bring all this disaster on us and on this city? Yet you bring added wrath on Israel by profaning the Sabbath. So it was at the gates of Jerusalem, as it began to be dark before the Sabbath, that I commanded the gates to be shut, and I charged that they must not open it until after the Sabbath. Then I posted some of my servants at the gates, so that no burdens would be brought in on the Sabbath day. Now the merchants and the sellers of all kinds of wares lodged outside of Jerusalem once or twice. Then I warned them and said to them, why do you spend the night around the wall? If you do so again, I will lay hands on you. From that time on, they came no more on the Sabbath. And I commanded the Levites that they should cleanse themselves, and that they should go and guard the gates to sanctify the Sabbath day. Remember me, O God, concerning this also, and spare me according to the greatness of your mercy. I love that. He's like, I don't even want the temptation around the walls. Like, this is the day of rest, period. Verse 23, in those days I also saw Jews who had married women of Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab, and half of their children spoke the language of Ashdod, and could not speak the language of Judah, but spoke according to the language of one or the other people. So I contended with them and cursed them, struck some of them, and pulled out their hair, and made them swear by God, saying, you shall not give your daughters as wives to their sons, nor take their daughters for your sons or yourselves. Did not Solomon king of Israel sin by these things? Yet among many nations there was no king like him, who was beloved of his God, and God made him king over all of Israel. Nevertheless, pagan women caused even him to sin. Should we then hear of your doing all of this great evil, transgressing against our God by marrying pagan women? And one of the sons of Joiada, the son of Elishib, the high priest, was a son-in-law of Sanballat the Horonite. Therefore I drove him from me. Remember, O my God, because they have defiled the priesthood and the covenant of the priesthood and the Levites. Thus I cleansed them of everything pagan. I also assigned duties to the priests and the Levites, each to his service, and to bringing the wood offering and the first fruits at appointed times. Remember me, O God, for good. That's the end of Nehemiah. All right, so Esther, chapter 1. Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, this was Ahasuerus who reigned over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. In those days when King Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan, the citadel, that in the 3rd year of his reign he made a feast for all of his officials and servants, the powers of Persia and Media, the nobles and the princes of the province being before him. When he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the splendor of his excellent majesty for many days, 180 days in all. And when these days were completed, the king made a feast lasting 7 days to all the people who were present in Shushan the citadel, from great to small, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were white and blue linen curtains fastened with cords of fine linen and purple on silver rods and marble pillars. And on the couches were of gold and silver, and on a mosaic pavement of alabaster, turquoise, and white and black and marble. And they served drinks in golden vessels, each vessel being different from the other, with royal wine in abundance, according to the generosity of the king. In accordance with the law, the drinking was not compulsory, for so the king had ordered all of the officers of his household that they should do according to each man's pleasure. Queen Vashti also made a feast for the women in the royal palace which belonged to King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehumon, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abigatha, Zethar, and Carcass, 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing her royal crown, in order to show her beauty to the people and the officials, for she was beautiful to behold. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, brought by his eunuchs. Therefore, the king was furious, and his anger burned within him. Then the king said to the wise men who understood the times, for this was the king's manner toward all who knew law and justice, those closest to him being Karshena, Shether, Admatha, Tarshish, Merez, Marcina, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, who had access to the king's presence and who ranked highest in the kingdom. What shall we do to Queen Vashti according to the law? Because she did not obey the command of King Ahasuerus, brought to her by the eunuchs. And Memucan answered before the king and the princes, Queen Vashti has not only wronged the king, but also the princes and all the people who are in the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's behavior will become known to all women, so that they will despise their husbands in their eyes. And when they report, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she did not come. This very day, the noble ladies of Persia and Media will say to all the king's officials that they have heard of the behavior of the queen. Thus there will be excessive contempt and wrath. If it pleases the king, let a royal decree go out from him, and let it be recorded in the laws of the Persians and the Medes, that it will not be altered, that Vashti shall come no more before King Ahasuerus. And let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. When the king's decree, which he will make, is proclaimed throughout all of his empire, for it is great, all wives will honor their husbands, both great and small. And the reply pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. Then he sent letters to all the king's provinces, to each province in its own script, and to every people in their own language, that each man should be master in his own house, and speak in the language of his own people. Chapter 2. After these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus subsided, he remembered Vashti, what she had done, and what had been decreed against her. Then the king's servants who attended him said, let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather all the beautiful young virgins to Shushan the citadel, into the women's quarters, under the custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, custodian of the women, and let beauty preparations be given them, and let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This thing pleased the king, and he did so. And remember, he has 180 provinces. Verse 5, in Shushan the citadel there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. Kish had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captives who had been captured with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. And Mordecai had brought up Hadassah, that is, Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman was lovely and beautiful. When her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So it was when the king's command and decree were heard, And when many young women were gathered at Shushan the citadel under the custody of Haggai, that Esther also was taken to the king's palace, into the care of Haggai, the custodian of the women. Now the young woman pleased him, and she obtained his favor. So he readily gave beauty preparations to her besides her allowance. Then 7 choice maidservants were provided for her in the king's palace, and he moved her and her maidservants to the best place in the house of the women. Esther had not revealed her people or her family, for Mordecai had charged her not to reveal it. And every day Mordecai paced in front of the court of the women's quarters to learn of Esther's welfare and what was happening to her. Each young woman's turn came to go in to the king Ahasuerus after she had completed 12 months of preparation, according to the regulations for the women, for thus were the days of their preparation apportioned: 6 months with the oil of myrrh, and 6 months with perfumes and preparations for beautifying women, which the oil of myrrh represents death to flesh. Interesting, right? 12 months, 12 is the number of government. And then the adornment. After the death, God begins to adorn, right? Verse 13, thus prepared each young woman went to the king, and she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the women's quarters to the king's palace. In the evening she went, and in the morning she returned to the second house of the women, to the custody of Shashagaz, the king's eunuch, who kept the concubines. She would not go in to the king again unless the king delighted in her and called for her by name. Now when the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his daughter to go in to the king, she requested nothing but what Haggai, the king's eunuch, the custodian of the women, advised. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all who saw her. So Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. The king loved Esther more than all of the other women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the other virgins. So he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king made a great feast, the feast of Esther, for all of his officials and servants, and he proclaimed a holiday in the provinces and gave gifts to the generosity of a king. So not only did he make her queen, he proclaimed a holiday. 19, verse 19. When virgins were gathered together a second time, Mordecai sat within the king's gate. Now Esther had not yet revealed her family and her people, just as Mordecai had charged her. For Esther obeyed the command of Mordecai, as when she was brought up by him. In those days, while Mordecai sat within the king's gate, 2 of the king's eunuchs, Bigthan and Teresh, doorkeepers, became furious and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. So the matter became known to Mordecai, who told Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. And when an inquiry was made into the matter, it was confirmed, and both were hanged on a gallows. And it was written in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. Chapter 3. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes who were with him. And all of the king's servants who were within the king's gates bowed and paid homage to Haman. So the king had commanded concerning him. But Mordecai would not bow or pay homage. Then the king's servants who were within the king's gate said to Mordecai, why do you transgress the king's command? Now it happened when they spoke to him daily that he would not listen to them, that they told it to Haman, to see whether Mordecai's words would stand, for Mordecai had told them that he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow or pay him homage, Haman was filled with wrath. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him of the people of Mordecai. Instead, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews who were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, the people of Mordecai. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast that is, to cast lots, before Haman to determine the day and the month, until it fell on the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, "There is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the people in all of the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from all the other peoples, and they do not keep the king's laws. Therefore, it is not fitting for the king to let them remain. If it pleases the king, let a decree be written that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who do the work, to bring it into the king's treasuries." So the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. And the king said to Haman, "The money and the people are given to you, to do with them as seems good to you." Then the king's scribes were called on the 13th day of the first month, and a decree was written according to all that Haman commanded, to the king's satraps, to the governors who were over each province, to the officials of all of the people, to every province according to its script, and to every people in their language. In the name of King Ahasuerus it was written and sealed with the king's signet ring. And the letters were sent by couriers into all of the king's provinces, to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all the Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their possessions. A copy of the document was to be issued as law in every province, being published for all of the people, that they should be ready for that day. The couriers went out, hastened by the king's command, and the decree was proclaimed in Shushan the citadel. So the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Shushan was perplexed. Chapter 4. When Mordecai learned all that happened, he rent his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes, and went into the midst of the city. He cried out with a loud and bitter cry. He went as far as the front of the king's gate, for no one might enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. And in every province where the king's command and decree arrived, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. So Esther's maids and eunuchs came and told her, and the queen was deeply distressed. Then she sent garments to clothe Mordecai and to take his sackcloth away from him, but he would not accept them. Then Esther called Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, whom he had appointed to attend to her. And she gave him a command concerning Mordecai, to learn what and why this was. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the city square that was in front of the king's gate. And Mordecai told him all that had happened to him, and the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasuries to destroy the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the written decree for their destruction, which was given at Shushan, that he might show it to Esther and explain it to her, and that he may command her to go in to the king to make supplication to him and plead before him for her people. Isn't it interesting how there's always some form of bribery or sellout when it comes to the people of God? Because even Jesus Judas with the money, like it's crazy. Verse 10, then Esther spoke to Hathach and gave him a command for Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that any man or woman who goes into the inner court of the king who has not been called, he has but one law, put all to death, except the one whom the king holds out the golden scepter, that he may live. Yet I myself have not been called to go into the king these 30 days. So they told Mordecai Esther's words. And Mordecai told them to answer Esther, do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Yet, who knows whether you have come into the kingdom for such a time as this? Boy, that's the most powerful scripture. Woo! Jesus. Oh my gosh. So much revelation just in that one little piece of scripture. Notice how he says, you and your father's house will perish. Not the mother's house, the father's house. And then he didn't have doubt either, because he said, if you don't do it, God will raise another. Like what? Powerful. Verse 15, then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan and fast for me. Neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will fast likewise. And so I will go to the king, which is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. That's powerful too. So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther commanded him. So powerful. Oh my gosh. Okay. Breakdown. Nehemiah chapter 13. Revival must be actively guarded. So yesterday we started in 8 new beginnings. We were talking about revival. Now we end in 13. Nehemiah returns to Jerusalem and discovers corruption has re-entered. Compromise with enemies, neglect of worship support, Sabbath violations, and intermarriage. Nehemiah confronts the issues forcefully and restores order. This chapter reveals a sobering truth. Revival doesn't maintain itself. Without vigilance, compromise can creep back in quietly. Nehemiah models courageous enforcement of godly standards after restoration is complete. The spiritual reform requires continual oversight to remain intact. That's why we've seen so many revivals and then it falls apart, and revival fall apart, revival fall apart, because the leaders even go into sin, but no one's there to keep maintaining it. The batons are not being passed. But I believe that God is raising up people who will carry revival and keep revival going, Spiritual reform requires continual oversight to remain intact. Devotional truth, neglect allows compromise to return. The leadership truth, leaders must guard spiritual gains intentionally. The leadership nuggets of this chapter is that revival fades without vigilance. Leaders must confront drift decisively. Compromise often re-enters quietly. Faithful leadership includes correction and not just construction. Esther chapter 1, pride creates vacuums God will fill. King Ahasuerus removes Queen Vashti after a display of defiance. The royal decree sets the stage for a leadership change. This chapter reveals that prideful authority destabilizes itself. Vashti's removal isn't random. It creates space for a divine repositioning. God is not named, yet his sovereignty is active in this chapter. God removes positions when pride blocks divine purpose. And the devotional truth of this chapter is that God works even when his name is not spoken. The leadership truth, arrogance displaces authority. Leadership nuggets. Pride creates leadership vacuums. God advances purpose through shifts. Absence of God's name is not absence of his hand. Leadership instability often precedes divine transformation. Esther chapter 2, God positions people before crisis appears. Esther, a Jewish woman, is chosen as queen. Mordecai uncovers a plot to assassinate the king, which is recorded but not immediately rewarded. This chapter reveals that God positions people early for future deliverance. Faithfulness occurs long before recognition. Silent obedience sets delayed victory into motion. God positions servants quietly before their purpose is revealed. Let me say that again. God positions servants quietly before their purpose is revealed. The devotional truth of this chapter is that faithfulness today prepares us for breakthrough tomorrow. The leadership truth of this chapter is that leaders are often prepared before they are revealed, because the Lord has to bring the revealing, the divine uncovering, right? Leadership nuggets of this chapter. Obedience precedes opportunity. God records unseen faithfulness. Preparation often happens in obscurity, and timing belongs to God and not to man. Esther chapter 3. Threat exposes purpose. Haman rises to power and plots genocide against the Jews after Mordecai refuses to bow. A decree is sealed to destroy God's people. Isn't it so crazy how one person refused to bow and he's like, I'm not just coming for you. I'm coming for everything that's attached to you. You know, this chapter reveals that destiny becomes visible when it's threatened. Opposition identifies identity. Mordecai's unyielding conviction contrasts sharply with Haman's pride. Spiritual opposition often reveals divine belonging. The devotional truth of this chapter is that standing firm may provoke resistance. The leadership truth of this chapter, conviction clarifies calling under pressure. Leadership nuggets, integrity reveals allegiance. Pride reacts violently to non-submission. Threats expose spiritual identity. God allows pressure to reveal purpose. Esther chapter 4, courage is required at critical moments. Mordecai urges Esther to act, declaring that she has come into the kingdom for such a time as this. Esther fasts, risks her life, and resolves to approach the king. This chapter reveals that delay must give way to decisive courage. Divine positioning demands a human response. God's deliverance awaits our obedience. God's deliverance often hinges on courageous obedience. The devotional truth of this chapter is that faith chooses action over fear, and the leadership truth is that leaders must rise when silence becomes disobedience. The extra nuggets. Calling requires courage to be activated. Risk accompanies responsibility. Leadership moments are time sensitive. God's purposes include human participation. These chapters reveal vigilance, positioning, and courage. So the summary for chapters 13 through Esther 4. Revival must be protected. That's Nehemiah 13. Esther 1, pride creates divine opportunity. 2, God positions before crisis. 3, threat exposes purpose. 4, courage activates destiny. God requires continual vigilance to protect revival. He orchestrates positioning quietly before crisis arises, exposes our identity through opposition, and activates deliverance through courageous leadership. When correction is enforced and courage is embraced, God's purposes advance, even without visible miracles. The leadership takeaway of this chapter is that godly leaders guard spiritual progress, remain faithful in obscurity, stand firm under pressure, and act courageously when destiny demands movement. Silence delays our deliverance, but obedience releases it. So good. I love the leadership prospect of things. I'm enjoying digging into each chapter and finding the leadership nuggets. So I hope you guys are blessed just as much as I am, because they're very, very good. Okay, so we will be doing chapter 5 through 9 tomorrow, 5 through 9, and we will end this week with a bang. Amen. I love you guys. I pray that you are blessed, and I will see y'all first thing tomorrow. Amen. And I'm just going to kind of give it a second, because every time that I close it out, for some reason, it cuts off some of what I said. And so I'm like, I'm not going to close it until all the important stuff is done. I think there's like a lag on you guys' end. And so whenever it closes out, it doesn't fully capture everything. I haven't checked the end of the videos, but I'm going to go back and check them. But prayerfully, you guys are getting the full video without cut off. So anyways, I love you guys. Have a good rest of your day. Amen.